Welcome back to the weekly news roundup. Today we're going to be talking about surveillance and how many of these tech bros are now coming down promoting the virtues of surveillance because it's simply going to make us a lot better people. And they're doing this like it's good. And then these are, of course, the same guys that are paying these city councils to, despite like they can have record turnouts about like data centers or flock cameras. It's always one of those two. And then they'll come in and they'll just be like, dude, we don't want this. Overwhelmingly, they don't want it. And then they turn around, well, thank you for all of your comments. And then they turn around and sign the deal anyway. Okay. There's actually one, I forget where it was at. I want to say it was Oklahoma, but there was one recently that literally the whole community showed up. They all rejected it. The people went on with it, and every person up for election got primaried out, and every person on the board got recalled. Yeah, fight back, baby. That's how to do it. But these tech bros are so insane. They need to be in psychiatric hospitals and straitjackets, not the ones pushing a lot of the policies and the procedures. Of course, we've talked briefly on like Palantir, Peter Thiel at Palantir, and I believe he also has a hand in Flock as well. They really want to abolish the government and have the companies in charge. Kind of like that. I mean, the only world I can think of that is really in, there's actually two movies I can think of that's kind of the world. One of those is Avatar, and to a lesser extent, and I think the other one of those is Alien, the Alien series. Of course, there's a lot of reference that everything is basically controlled by the company. So that's kind of interesting. So X Prize founder says humans behave better when they're being watched. You think? You know, I mean, yeah, guys in prison under surveillance do tend to behave more. But the problem we have is in the United States, I can't speak to other dystopian hellholes, but in the United States, we have an expectation of privacy and an expectation that, well, we did at one point in time. But X Prize Foundation founder Peter Diamandis has joined a growing list of tech executives who think the global surveillance is a good idea, saying humans behave better when they're being watched. It is true humans may behave better when they're being watched. The question is, should we be watching humans all the time? Are you being watched all the time? You know, it's kind of like in 1984, right? Everybody had to have the telly screen on because, of course, it made you behave better or at least find ways to behave differently around the telly screens. But, you know, the party leaders, they could turn those telly screens off for short periods of time, not all the time, but for short periods of time. Of course, a lot of these company assets, it's like government assets. You know, you all have to have this nonsense thing pushed upon you, but it doesn't apply to us. We're in Congress, you know, and that's kind of the problem. So he says radical transparency is coming, a future where you can know anything, anytime, anywhere, a future where no one can hide. And that sounds to me very dystopian. Quote, we are wrapping the planet in a sensor ecosystem, in an sensor ecosystem, learned grammar, dude. A living, multi-layered sensing system that runs from the cameras in your home to the phone in your pocket to autonomous cars and humanoid robots on the ground to drones and flying cars in the air, all the way up to a constellation of satellites imaging every square meter of the Earth every single day. Guys, that sounds like a prison planet. Going back to the movie Alien, wasn't there that prison planet? Was that the second or the third one? I think that was the third one, wasn't it? Second one maybe? I don't remember. But, quote, citizens will be on their best behavior because we're constantly recording and reporting everything that's going on. Of course, the big tech CEOs don't. In fact, there's an episode of Leverage, which looks at, they're looking at this deep surveillance in this one building. I think it was one of the Steranko buildings where I think it was like mid-season 3 or something. And They had to figure out a way into this building that the cameras couldn't get. Well, they identified where the C-suite executives were because they're the only floor that didn't have the constant surveillance. Okay. It's kind of like, yeah, that's what we're seeing. And that's what we're going to see. These big elites are not following. It's the same thing New York City right now is telling everybody, you know, this heat wave's coming. Keep your thermostats at 78, you know, 78. Some of you dream for 78 right now. Okay. But do you think that Mamdani's mansion is at 78? I have a sneaky suspicion it's probably not. I think it's a tad bit cooler in there, you know. If you build a school, we're going to see the school. If you build this data center, we're going to see the data center. And the accountability is going to be there for the whole world to see, no matter what. Yeah, if you build a compound in your backyard or a vegetable garden, so you're not as dependent on the shifting food prices, so that they can label you as a potential extremist. Remember that a couple years ago? You guys can look this up if you want. A couple years ago, Facebook was keeping an internal list of what they called extremists. It was people doing video content or talking about canning and growing their own food. Yes, growing your own food. Of course, now these satellite imagery can go around and identify everybody that has solar panels or that has, maybe off-grid gas storage, maybe off-grid propane or oil or gardens or anything that makes them less dependent on the core of society. Because what do we know? I'm sorry to get biblical here, but I have to. In the end times, we are going to live in a world where everybody is dependent on the one world government structure, and nobody can do any form of commerce outside of the means that mandates. And they want everybody tied perpetually into that. This is in the book of Revelation. All right. And the biggest threat to them is going to be the Jews and the Christians, because those two are excluded from that one world economy to get them oppressed, but they manage to survive by being self-sufficient off the land. That is what he's trying to do. He's trying to produce a world where they can identify everybody who's growing their own food, and that means they are going to be less subjective to the economic pressures, because the one world government demands everybody suspect to the economic pressures. That is how insane this is going to be. So, of course, you got to push for surveillance on everybody because it's been making better citizens since 1984. It's become increasingly hard for people to make it through their day without being photographed by home security systems like Ring, camera-laden cars like Tesla makes, or automated license plate readers from Flock. Even if they can, they are surveilled through their phones by ad networks and data brokers. Now, I have no idea what these ad networks are and data brokers we're talking about, because I use Graphene OS, and I actively block all that kind of stuff through a very good private DNS. And I'm not sure I've ever seen an ad on my phone. So, there are ways around it. And there are ways to be close to invisible. Not always, of course. If the cell company knows where I am, of course, because the FCC rules they're proposing right now are not yet into effect. They don't know my real name. So there's always that. All right. Quote, your kids will grow up in a world with no off the record, end quote. Yeah, that's going to make evil, crazy, distrusting people. Yeah, yes, it will. I don't want my children to live in that. Teach them that the best privacy strategy is integrity. Okay, if we're dealing with integrity, we need to lock up all of Congress, everybody who is on Epstein Island. Let's throw them in jail. Let's seize their assets and pay off the national debt. You want to talk integrity? Let's get integrity going. Come on, man. We have to have integrity. Do you have integrity? I have a sneaky suspicion you're not being watched 24/7. However, unfortunately, some people are still sheeple. Not only are they putting Ring cameras on their doors, I knew one family was putting Ring cameras in their children's bedrooms. No. Where did they change? You want some weird third-party country person with a contract from Amazon watching your children while they sleep? You guys did know that these big tech companies are putting that data through third parties to verify that the cameras are behaving properly. Yeah. So I don't want Kenyans watching my children sleep. You shouldn't either. Some cities have covered their Flock cameras with trash bags after reports the company data was accessed by ICE and the FBI and law enforcement. Now, of course, the law enforcement that does put these up has access to the data for 30 days. Flock, their data doesn't expire, though. That's the unfortunate thing here. And so over here, we have the definitions of good or honest are unfortunately often in the eyes of the beholder. In this case, powerful tech companies that control the surveillance infrastructure. And so that is certainly a factor there as well. So this is a crazy guy that really wants this surveillance everywhere. And so we got some neat examples of it. Coming soon to a Pixel phone near you. audio memory. This is Google's version of an audio version of Recall. And it's going to be pushed out on every Pixel 10 device. Of course, unless you're running Graphene OS like me, then you probably won't get this. In fact, I'm pretty much guarantee you won't. But there is still some question about what exactly it's going to do. Some speculation says it's only to identify music around you, which of course requires it to always be listening. So they're working on a new feature, but there's other parts of their marketing approach here that suggests it's not just music. Listen to this. Google's working on a new feature called audio memory for Pixel phones that will keep track of what you hear throughout the day. Is that just music, or is that everything you hear throughout the day? Do I need a record of everything I hear throughout the day? I mean, really? Okay. So the latest version, which is C4, the Android System Intelligence for Pixel 10, contains strings that describe audio memory, which is codenamed Blue Flags. So they want to keep track of what you hear throughout your day, from the music around you to your important conversations. So Google's going to be creating a recall system to record your private conversations. Wonderful. How does this apply in a place like Pennsylvania that we are a two-party consent state? You have a Pixel phone. It's automatically reporting the phone conversation we have. Guess what? That could very well be a felony. So more limited possibility for audio memories is just to capture audio during phone calls. You have in apps like the dialer, so it could just be listening to your phone calls. Okay. Audio memory appears to be a background service that listens for audio, while other apps like Now Playing and a possible new dedicated Pixel app provide the end user experience. So, that's what they're doing. So here's some screen of their setup. So this is a new screen when you onboard a new Pixel device. Welcome to audio memory. Keep track of what you hear throughout your day, from music around you to your important conversations. You can do music recognition. Here's continue. So that goes to music recognition. Notice you can turn on music recognition or no thanks. I don't see any similar thing to the conversations around you. So, I guess your phone may very well be listening to everything going on around you. You will not have any private spot. So there you go. That's wonderful. This is neat here regarding the flock cameras. SCOTUS just ruled against Dragnet surveillance. Now, that's the headline. It's not quite as clear as that. This deals with the Geofence warrants. Now, what the Supreme Court ruled is that, indeed, the law enforcement that wants to do a Geofence Dragnet must get a warrant. Prior to that, it wasn't just get a warrant. It was, they could literally just go to their buddies at Google and be like, hey, tell us everyone there. Basically, it was an administrative request, not an actual judicial warrant. So what this basically means now is that law enforcement cannot just go without a warrant and get the data. But the reality is judges issue warrants all the time, unless there's a possibility of somebody inconvenient for that warrant to be caught up in it. I don't know. There's a politician that lives nearby. He could be caught up. We don't want to issue that warrant. But for the most part, they're just going to come by and rubber stamp. They're like, oh, there's a bank robber. We need to know everybody within here. Rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp, rubber stamp. This doesn't do much, but it does establish that you have to have a warrant to seek the data from a third-party company. Now, this raises the question about Flock. Because, of course, according to Flock, and they are right, unfortunately, the way that the location data is captured for these Geofence warrants on a phone is a lot different than how a Flock camera works, where the Flock camera is stationary and your phone is constantly moving. They're looking for what moves inside this geofence here, whereas the Flock camera sits stationary and you have to drive by it, so it's like who is driving by. So applied a similar way, the warrant for the Flock camera would say, hey, who's driven by this camera in the last 2 hours? That is a completely different question. And so looking at this, I don't think this does a lot, but it does give us a little bit more balance in that the biggest challenge with Flock is that these are mostly run by government institutions, and they're collecting a bunch of data without a warrant. And that is an avenue by which Flock could be ruled against. Unfortunately, being as that Peter Thiel has something to do with Flock, and he works with the current administration, and by the way, past administrations as well, the chance of them actually ruling against Flock, I would say, is fairly low on the nepotism scale, fairly high on the legalism scale. So it depends on what type of judge you get in the middle, unfortunately. But a new Supreme Court ruling could lead restrictions on Flock, says attorneys challenging the constitutionality, even though this didn't deal with Flock, this dealt with geofence warrants. In a 6-3 decision, allowed investigators to indiscriminately obtain location data from cell phones with a specific area during a frame of time constitutes a government search requiring a warrant. So it's no longer an administrative ask, it's a judicial warrant to get the geofences. So it doesn't ban geofences. What it does is it requires a warrant. So there are obvious parallels between Flock and Google location data, and since that surveillance affects everybody. Of course, a Flock spokesperson however, contended the Supreme Court's decision will not affect any cases involving Flock. He said the two technologies are vastly different. And I think that this person is potentially correct. However, it could be cited to say, hey, these things here are already, in fact, my case is that for Flock data to operate is actually more unconstitutional, because Flock, in many instances, while the Flock company itself is independent, most of the Flock camera data is collected by government entities whom are doing it on people with no presumed guilt. And they're doing it on a Dragnet style. And so that certainly is a challenge. So ALRP data is not cell phone location history and does not follow a person. Again, they are correct about that. But that does not mean that, everybody must show an ID to go through this zone. Well, that presumes that they're guilty of something. And that's what they say. Now, Cuyahoga County, unfortunately, which is in Ohio, has more than 1,700 automated license plate readers, and most of them manufactured by Flock Safety. Many of them are businesses or schools, but over 1,100, that would be well over 50%, are leased by law enforcement agencies. So they say Flock and geofence warrants share key similarities because both collect data on large numbers of people, most of whom are not suspected of criminal activity. And that is the hinge pin. This is why all surveillance should be banished. But, it is making better citizens since 1984. So both systems allow investigators to search data retroactively, meaning law enforcement can examine information on many people rather than a specific criminal suspect. Geofence warrants and Flock database, by contrast, sweep up information on people who have no connection to a crime. And that is really what the precedent happens to be. So the Supreme Court did rule on the narrow scope of geofence warrant case, which sought just 2 hours of location data around the scene of a bank robbery because poor Sap was running around it. Now, these rules would be a lot better if the guy caught up in the dragnet was not actually guilty. Some of these, they're looking for the exception to get stuff thrown out, and that's unfortunate. Focus instead, though, on the camera that locked up the lady was she from Tennessee, I think, for a bank fraud in Fargo, North Dakota, and she had never been to Fargo, North Dakota, and it took 9 months to get her out of jail. Yeah, that's definitely the one that we need to banish these cameras over. That's the case you need to cite for this type of stuff. But the last thing we want to look at is what happens after all of this data collection. And this article is fairly convoluted, but it does focus a whole lot on this picture of this guy in the mirror here. So it says, we value your privacy. Of course, terms and conditions may apply, and a little bit harder to read text there. And you got a picture of two people staring into this mirror. But what's revealed is that you can see the one person looking in the mirror there, but what he doesn't see is that this is a two-way mirror and there's a bunch of people looking back. So while he only sees the things directly relevant to him, he does not see everything going on behind the mirror, and that really is the point. So I don't think I'm going to spend the time to look at all of my individual highlights, but just a couple points here. All of these privacy policies start out by saying, we value your privacy, or we respect your privacy. You know, like LastPass. We respect your privacy. We collect only the information needed to provide you with the exact service you need. We'll just go ahead and buy a bunch of data, augment our profile, and what you give us from third-party data collectors, store it all in, sell it to a marketing firm who leaks the data all over the internet. You know, I mean, but we value your privacy. Okay. And the challenge here that this whole article is getting at is all of this data gets collected on us, and the first person to collect it, they may have this policy, but then they turn around immediately and give it to some third party. Well, that third party didn't have an agreement with you, and then they just turn around and go, look at all this data. Amazing. You know, in fact, there's an insurance company I will never do business with again. And that insurance company, I love telling you about the businesses I will never do business with again. That is Allstate. I will never do business with Allstate again, which is a shame because a friend of mine was an agent. So I needed a renter's policy. And so I contacted a friend of mine who's an agent, and, you know, he set me up with a policy, and that was all fine. The problem lay with his boss. So we go in, and he knows who I am. We go into his office. This is, I think we set it up during the Koofies. So I go into his home office because, you know, we were friends. We'd known each other. And I was like, hey, I want to make sure I want to opt out of any and all selling or sharing or any use of my data. I never want to hear from you outside of, hey, this is an update to your policy. Hey, your policy is renewed, or hey, this is a bill that's due. That's all I want. I literally watched him sit at his computer and plug all of those in. I watched him go into every place and opt me out of absolutely everything. And then his douchebag of a boss turns around and looks down and says, hey, look at all these people, and collects all of the data, irregardless of what was put in there, in full violation of Allstate's regulation. He took all that data and he threw it in some marketing firm. And to this day, I still get marketing crap from Allstate, who's not technically from Allstate. It's from some third party that my friend's boss collected up, ignoring what I was absolutely supposed to do with Allstate, and completely ignoring that, feeding it all in. And now that information goes all over the place. Now, I am very good and I obfuscate about everything, so it all landed into a throwaway email anyway, but I still have access to the throwaway email that I check and I make sure isn't being abused. So I actually contacted the executive support at Allstate, opened up the case about it, and they're like, oh yeah, this is a serious problem. They saw that I had opted out. They said this is a major violation. Of course, they never did anything. The douchebag is still an agent, not my friend, but his boss is still an agent for Allstate, and I'm still to this day getting nonsense, despite I did absolutely everything I am supposed to do. Okay, take another case. I unfortunately, being in this office, instead I got to pay a power bill. And so in the power bill, the only monopolistic power company I have to deal with has a monopolistic payment port for a partner I have to go through, who is also a third party. So I read that privacy policy very clearly, and it says, you know, we use this for this and this and this. If you don't want to do anything, let's email this. So the very day I signed up to use their system, because I had no other choice, I emailed them right away and I said, hey, I am opting out of all forms of data sharing, data collecting, marketing, anything, absolutely anything and everything at all. They really sent me an email back. Well, we have no record of doing business with you. I said, I just submitted it and I just emailed you. And they sent back another one. Well, we don't use anything. It's like, dude, your privacy policy disagrees with what you just said. Now, this is too early yet to see if that data is going to be abused. But the point is that all these guys have these informed consent, and then they have a thing in there that says, if you do not agree to this, send an email to this company. And then those guys send an email, and they're never expecting to receive an email from somebody. Like, somebody's read our privacy policy. What do we do? You know? And so it's screwed up. We have a screwed up world. And this is the problem, is that all that data gets collected. And then once all that data gets collected, it just gets shuffled into this endless stream of nonsense that we can't even control. And this is why the entirety of the data broker industry needs 100% abolished. It should be 100%, 1000% illegal for any person to have private information on any other private citizen without their direct knowledge or consent. And that directly means, hey, you better have a piece of paper with my signature on it that I physically signed. We better have a direct one-on-one direct business relationship with you. And if the power company can't figure out how to collect money on their own behalf, maybe they shouldn't be a power company anymore and they should be shut down and allow somebody else to come in and actually run the system and collect the fees. Because I should not be relying on some third-party nonsense company who doesn't even know their policies for opting out from their privacy policy. But it's okay, because surveillance has been making better citizens since 1984. We all behave so much better because of it. I just haven't seen that in society yet. Let me know if you have. I don't know. Anyway, thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts about all of this in the comments down below.